hello and good morning to 1 hour with exclusive here on Impulse Radio and Television Africa. Today we are focusing on the absolute critical engine for African growth, the finance and investment needed to build the vital transport infrastructure that underpinned our trade. Today online we have the pleasure to be joined by Dirk van der Berg, and I hope that I pronounce it good because I'm from a French background, and this is your station, your TV. You know that we're bringing all the best of the sector, all the insight of the sector, and like I said previously, we are joining by Mr. Dirk, who's basically the country head of South Africa and Southern Africa at the UK Export Finance, commonly called UKEF. So let me welcome Mr. Dirk. Dirk, how are you?
Thank you very much to you and your viewers and listeners. Very good. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here today.
So let's start because we started late, and I apologize to all of the listeners across Africa. But let's start by introduce us to what is your institution about? What are you doing for the continent? Let's drive us to know better about your institution.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I represent UK Export Finance, as you mentioned. And what UK Finance is, or UKEF, I'm just going to use UKEF as an acronym, so apologies for that. It's just easier. We're the Export Credit Agency, or also the ECA, Export Credit Agency for the UK government. And what that really means is we fund and finance large-scale infrastructure projects and or capital goods and or professional services. We're really there to support UK businesses exporting into Africa, in African countries. I'm one of 6 representatives that spread around Africa as a whole. I represent Southern Africa, and those are all countries east and south of Angola, up to including Mauritius. The normal countries, Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, and others there through to Mauritius, and then obviously Angola. Then I also have 5 counterparts and colleagues in 2 in West Africa, concentrating on Francophone Africa countries there, being very successful in West Africa. Also, one colleague of mine in East Africa, based in Nairobi, then one colleague in Egypt, and also one in Morocco. But really what we are is we fund and facilitate and try and support the export trade from the UK, but it's not at the expense of any country, African country, or rest of the world for that matter. We actually, as a matter of interest, 25 finance experts spread across the world working for UK Export Finance.
Okay, so I would like, just out of the topic, how do you find the infrastructure in Africa so far, and do you see any hope, any potential, and according also to your institution, do you envisage to support and accompany Africa in this long and beautiful journey?
Very, very much so. Very good question. But, so maybe it's also important to note that UKEF is over 100 years old, and we really have a very, very keen appetite and support for the African continent as a whole. Hence, 6 of us focusing on the continent itself. We've been very successful in countries like Angola. We've got out of the door, paid out, and this is all public knowledge, around about £1 billion worth of projects that we've already funded, with a significant number in the process at this point of time, including the transport side there too, which we can talk about a little bit later. Southern Africa, Zambia as well. We also instrumental in Zambia there. We funded around about 112, I think it was, rural clinics and moderate hospitals. But for the rest of Southern Africa, the ECA market, Export Credit Agency market, is actually quite slow in the uptake, and there's various reasons for that. But if we were to move up into Africa, and certainly West Africa, we've been very, very successful, as I alluded to earlier on. Those are countries that really have taken on export finance, export credit agency funding and finance. They really understand it very well. Whereas other countries in Africa really needs to develop a little bit further. But for many countries, not all countries, but for many countries in southern or in Africa as a whole, but also Southern Africa for that matter, then we've got very strong appetite. Just by way of example, I've got up to £5 billion worth of appetite for South Africa, and at least £5 billion for a country like Botswana. Now, needless to say that money, we're not in non-concessional funding. We do only concessional funding. It's really, at the end of the day, it's loans that need to be repaid, and we can talk around that, how that gets done in a little bit more detail. But it's massive appetite that we have. It's patient capital. It's also long-dated capital. So very much UKEF as a ECA is very much committed to the African continent as a whole, and we're very keen supporters of the African continent. And we've had much success in the on the continent as a whole already, but we would also like to be even more positive going forward.
Yes, moving on also, because I spoke to a few people on investment across the Francophone region, that side, and there is a sense of not readiness for investors. Is that a challenge that you face in terms of how those Francophone countries, because it seems that the English former colonies are doing better than the Francophone colonies, and we see also the lack of readiness in terms of the structure, for example, the law, the policies around what determine a country ready for investor. Is it also part of your challenges, or how does it affect your relationship with this side of the continent?
Yeah, I think it will always do. It's a very complex market at the end of the day. Africa, there's a lot of political instability in many countries, but then also factors like foreign exchange, the lack of foreign exchange, and the liquidity of the foreign exchange itself are real key factors in all of that. What we have, we do country risk analysis. We've got a country risk team that does that, and the available market risk appetite, what we call it, is readily available. And if your listeners and viewers want to just know what appetite we have for a country, it's very easy to do a Google search on UKEF or UK Export Finance country cover. You can literally just type in UKEF country cover, and then it brings you with the alphabetical list there of all the countries that we've got appetite for and what the amounts are for that. Now, obviously, in that, and more specifically to your question, is it's sometimes difficult to go into some new markets, but because we understand, and again, it comes with a regional representation where I'm obviously looking after Southern Africa's side. My counterparts, Dimitri and Stephen Gray in West Africa, truly understand. They've been in those markets for many years. Mm-hmm. They truly understand the dynamics of the market, and that is the beauty of having us from a representative and a country point of view in those markets. We understand it, we're close to the markets, we talk to the ministries of finance, we talk to commerce, we talk to the business people, etc., on an ongoing basis. So we've got that good understanding, and we obviously feed that through into the country risk teams and into the London head office at the end of the day. So it's very many dynamics and factors that gets taken into account. But I think it's the understanding of those countries, understanding of those entities, and then also being able, nimble enough, small teams obviously on our side, to really penetrate those markets on a meaningful basis.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's put the stage, let's set the stage and speak about finance, trade, and infrastructure. I would like to see, I know you have a lot, like they say 4 decades of experience. That is huge. I want to be you. How do you see the relationship between robust trade finance mechanism, accessible corporate finance, and actual development of large-scale transport infrastructure in Africa? And will you be able to give us the key interdependency between those elements?
Yeah, so I think it's right to say that the sovereigns, the governments themselves, are largely responsible for the infrastructure spend in Africa at this point of time. I know that there's a tendency to move, into PPP structures, private-public partnership structures, and the like, where they want to bring in the private sector, simply because the sovereign balance sheets are getting quite full on that. But I think, again, to answer the question more specifically, is that everybody needs to work together. You've got your DFIs, your development finance institutions, you've got your multilateral banks, you've got your commercial banks, and then you've got your export credit agencies, of which obviously UKEF is one of many in the world. We all need to work together. We need to work together with a borrower, whoever the ultimate borrower is. In Africa, I think it's fair to say that the majority of our business is with sovereigns, either to the Ministry of Finance directly or to the line ministries, supported by the Ministry of Finance and Treasury in the respective countries. But we also, and certainly from the Southern Africa point of view, maybe more specifically, trying to really look at going into the corporate market in the private sector as well, to provide our facilities and our product range to these markets and in corporate companies itself. I think also, working together with the commercial banks, we will always work with the commercial bank. Our structure just lends itself to working with commercial banks, where we largely guarantee the liquidity of the commercial banks, but then they take a credit risk, and I don't want to get too technical, but it is needed to be understood. They take a credit view on UK government risk, because UK Export Finance is the ministerial government department of the UK government. So we actual government in true sense of the word. So our guarantees that we provide to the banks then allow them to take a better credit rating risk on the project itself, therefore making it potentially a bit cheaper or significantly cheaper. But also, I think more importantly, it extends the tenor, because we can go up to 15 years plus a construction period of up to 3 years for normal infrastructure related projects, and then for green projects, renewable projects, 22 years plus a construction period of up to 3 years. So you spread the tenor. And what it is, it's ECA funding and guarantees will never make a bad project good, but it could make a marginal project a good project. And what I'm saying through that is, if you look at maybe a project finance type of transaction, which we can also do, we're quite flexible in what the type of arrangement and construct of the project is. So we can do PPPs, we can do project finance, we can do sovereign loans, etc. So if you look at those, it becomes a lot more feasible and a lot more attractive for the borrower, because one, it's cheaper on the one side, than commercial debt itself from the commercial banks, I would say. And then secondly, it is also a longer tenor. So that marginal transaction becomes feasible because of the extended tenor, not because it was a bad project to start off with, but maybe the repayment period from the commercial transaction was maybe a little bit too aggressive itself. So really, it's working together, and we always say we're complementary to the financial industry. We're not in competition to them. We sort of come in at the back end, and we're really in between the DFIs and the multilateral banks, where it comes on on concessional funding versus our non-concessional funding, and we're in between the commercial banks and obviously then the concessional lenders itself. So there's a place for everyone, and I think it's a matter of understanding export credit agency funding, ECA funding, as an alternative structure or additional structure for funding mechanism, both by sovereigns and corporates alike.
Okay, thank you for this clarification. Moving on, I know you have successfully consulted freight and logistics around the SADC. I would like to find out what are the most significant financial challenge that you had in terms of the cross-border transportation network in the continent.
Yeah, again, another very good question. And I think no one transaction will be the same. You know, everybody, you need to analyze each and every transaction on merit, but each and every transaction is different too. But a couple of things that I can immediately think of, you know, when it comes cross-border type of transactions, is obviously the jurisdiction thereof. You know, each country wants to do their own thing in the sense of their own laws. That's problematic. So, you know, for obviously for London-based entity or UK government itself, we would want UK law. So different countries are, you know, are differently geared towards accepting UK law and the like. Generally speaking, you know, it can be done, or it should be done. But it's all those things where that comes into play. It's who is the beneficial owner of the equipment or the goods being transported. And yeah, I'm thinking of, you know, a corridor, a rail corridor, you know, owned by 2 or 3 different countries at the end of the day. So where does it start? Where does it stop? Etc. Then the other thing also is obviously, and I've spoken about that a little bit earlier on, is the liquidity side, the foreign exchange, you know, the availability of foreign exchange and hard currency. And I think that's really in many African countries a stumbling block, or, you know, difficult to do. I think for us, how we mitigate that at times from a UKEF point of view, and I've got to say it's not in all instances. And again, you know, if you were to go to the website or speak to one of, you know, professionals like us, like myself, 6 of us in Africa, we will be able to tell you. But we've got up to 60 different countries where we can do local currency funding. Now that's a significant benefit, you know, whereas obviously, if it's in hard currency and you don't earn in hard currency, and I'm talking here pounds, dollar, etc. If you don't earn that, and you know, the sovereigns or the companies don't have that, you know, to take out foreign exchange against that, or foreign exchange cover against that, could be very expensive itself. Obviously, a tremendous benefit if you can do it and guarantee it in a local currency. Now, got to immediately also say that, you know, in the case of a default, and we don't solve for defaults, but in the case of defaults, you know, there's crystallization clauses that comes in and different things, and then it will revert at a hard currency level, etc. Again, a very technical side thereof of the discussion that's maybe not quite necessary for this now, but there are mitigants in the overall scheme of things, and I think that's where it's very important to work together, you know, with the commercial banks, with the, you know, DFIs, and then also with the sovereigns itself. Multi-jurisdiction, not the easiest things to do, but it can certainly be done.
So how do you assist large-scale project in terms of transforming the transport infrastructure in Africa? And I would like also to know what specific finance tool or structure are typically employed in such circumstances.
Yeah, if I look at a couple that we've done, is on the transport side specifically, is one, we actually did 2 monorail deals in Egypt. Now I believe that was done, and I stand to be corrected, but it was done with the sovereign. We've also done a number of road infrastructures in several countries, both in West Africa and also a country like Angola, that we've done a lot of road infrastructure there. We've also done some airport structures or airports, and overall, all of those that I've mentioned are on sovereign balance sheet. So, you know, it's a sovereign lend at the end of the day, where we obviously, and maybe it's important at this juncture to just mention that we require a minimum, and it's an absolute minimum, it's not a target, of 20% UK content in the structure. Now, different ECAs, export credit agencies, got different levels of requirements. It can go up to, the minimum is 20% at this point of time, which we are, I believe, and then up to it could go as high as 90 and 100%, where, you know, the host country or the lending country wants 100% of the content. We only want 20% of the content. Now, in certain countries, we do want more, 30 or 40%, where our market risk appetite becomes constrained, and we need to obviously, see how we can maximize the benefit to the UK exporters itself. But it's, 20%, 30%, 40%, or even number we can go out with. And maybe also just to mention is that we can assist, the borrower at the end of the day, or the contractor, EPCs or contractors, with bringing in the supply chain, the UK supply chain. We work through, Department of Business and Trade and the like, to actually bring in the supply chain there. So, again, the listeners don't need to worry about how do we get the 20%, and also to mention that that could be tangible goods, but it's also professional fees and services and the like, that's available from the UK. Now, all of that said, we've been very successful in a number of those transactions that I mentioned. Can be done. We've done very successfully on a number of occasions. What we are looking currently at is a number of railway corridors. Not so easy to do that, as I mentioned earlier on. But in one-off countries or particular countries, it's a lot easier to do. So we are looking at that on the rail side. Ports is something that maybe, countries like South Africa that we really very keen in. Not the easiest thing again to do, but again, it all depends on who the borrower is and what the construct and the construct of the transaction is. I think in some of those instances, the PPPs, private-public partnerships that I alluded to early on, that is becoming the norm, and a lot of people are looking into that. I've got my personal views on PPPs. It's not the easiest of structures to do. There's quite a number of additional costs that comes into that, delays in that. There's equity investments that need to come in from the private company side. They need higher returns. So overall, it could be that PPP structures, there certainly is a place for it. I really do believe that there's a place for that. But it could also be that it is more expensive than just a normal sovereign borrowing at the end of the day. So, again, a number of successes and a number of projects that we currently are working on.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on so that we can learn and take maximum from your experience, because I know you have a lot. Let's speak about the role of export credit agency in de-risking transport investment, especially understand the ECA de-risking. So we know that the de-risking is critical for the ECAs. From your experience and background in credit and structured finance, what are the primary risks inherent in the large African transport infrastructures projects for you?
Yeah, and again, it's all those that I've previously mentioned. It's your political risk, it's your liquidity risk, it's your foreign currency or your hard currency risk, etc. on that. I do want to say, Tanga, it's important what I said earlier on. ECA transaction or ECA funding and support will not make a bad credit a good credit, and I think that is the basis thereof.
Okay.
You can't get away with that. So underlyingly, it's got to be a feasible project at the end of the day. It really does have to be. So, it's got to be viable for, if it's a sovereign borrowing, it's got to make sense for the government to do that.
Okay.
If it's if it's a corporate client, then it's got to make sense for them to do it. Now the corporates, they understand that a whole lot better. When it comes to the sovereign side, there are obviously social responsibilities that the governments do have there too. So it's not that all the projects that a sovereign will do will obviously make money. It's not right. We need to think of things like social housing. Even the transport side is actually a revenue generator. So that's a good instance where they can get back their money, maybe on concessions, maybe on PPP type of basis where, people do earn it back over a period of time, where the government, will do a guarantee for the shortfall only. So it doesn't come on the balance sheet, the whole amount itself. But the underlying is, I'm not gonna shy away from the fact that a bad credit risk will not become a good credit risk because of ECA mitigation.
Okay, so I know that you have had the meeting, and thank you for your time. But before I leave you, I would like to hear from you if you have something to add and some advice in terms of investment, and especially in this time where you're speaking about cross-border project and collaboration. What is your take on that, for example, and what is how do you see it go forwards for the good of the continent?
Yeah, so a couple of things to that. I think the listeners out there that's interested on hearing more about ECA funding is really to speak to their commercial bankers and or someone like myself and my colleagues in UKEF. Our contact details are very easily accessible on that. But there's many ECAs out there at the end of the day, and I obviously talk first and foremost, ECA structures, ECA funding, the concept thereof, and then it's also, of course, then where do you find the goods to that's required in the project at the end of the day. But I think it's important for the viewers and listeners to understand what ECA funding is, what the benefit of ECA funding is. And there again, I'll just reiterate, it's tenor extension. So, it extends the duration or the repayment profile of a transaction. And it will, in most cases, be significantly or marginally cheaper than commercial debt. So it comes in there somewhere in between, again, as I said, it's non-concessional debt, but it comes in between your concessional debt and your commercial debt. So it's got a place for it. It's not a product that gets used in each and every transaction. But I think, from the transport side, there's a lot of opportunity for that. And the sooner the individuals and the governments and EPCs and contractors talk to experts on the ECA field, the easier it is to build those product suites into the product solution at the end of the day. And I think that's very important. The quicker we talk around that, the easier it is to understand that. It's not a foreign concept. It's been going for over 100 years, as I've said. There are environmental, social, governance issues that one needs to take into account as well. I think that's something that I haven't mentioned, that often, cross-border could also be an issue because of different standards to do the ESG due diligence and reports, etc. We do it to Equator Principles and IFC standards. And if that's the norm, that's absolutely fine and it's acceptable to most funders then. Yeah. But it's to really get in, to understand the concept, to speak to bankers and or ECA providers or the ECAs themselves, and to understand that and to bring it into the discussion. At a time like we've had today, I really appreciate that, but it's just so limited. And I think this is just, the tip of the iceberg for us to take the discussion forward with anyone.
Correct. No, but thank you, Mr. Dirk, for your time and incredible insight. I hope that you have a further discussion, because I know when you speak about investment, there's a lot to talk about. We'll request another interview for you, but have a good day and a beautiful week ahead.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day. Thank you.